Has your groundwork session ever gone from bad to worse? Well, stick around. I'm going to show you how to improve your colt and make progress even after having a train wreck of a session. Welcome back to Becky Amio Horse Training. We are back today with Bonnie's 6-shooter. This is the yearling red roan colt I've used in several groundwork videos so far. I haven't done a whole lot with this colt, mostly just been leading him over to the round pen, turning him out so he can play and be a colt. And I've done a little bit of tying up with him, a little bit of grooming on him. So I'm starting today with rubbing him all over, getting my hands all over him, and then reminding him of some of the work that we've done already with him, which is just asking him to step out of our space and cross over with that front leg. And you can see he's quite a bit more reactive of a colt than the one we worked on last week, the little queso colt. This guy is super responsive. He's got a big flight. He's got a big response. He takes, a few more steps than I would like him to, but I just keep my hands on him. I keep petting him. I move into his space just a tiny little bit, and then I take the pressure off. I try to bring him back to me a little bit with a little bit of feel on my lead. Right here, normally I would have edited this part out trying to get him back into frame again in front of the camera. But what I want you guys to see is they don't all lead perfectly. And sometimes we have to go back and forth and walk around in front of them to get them to take that one step towards us. And with a little bit of pressure, we can get him back into the spot where we want him. For as much as I've led this colt back and forth to tie rails and to the round pen and back to his pen, when we get in the classroom, he doesn't always lead the best. And you're going to have days like that. You're going to have horses like that. I just want you guys to see that they're not all perfect. And there's different places where you can test them to see how well they're going to lead for you. This guy is not super comfortable with me touching him. What I find interesting is he is a lot better for me to groom on him than he is when I start to ask him to move his body around. So this guy just isn't real comfortable with standing still. It's telling us a lot about his personality and disposition, the fact that he just wants to keep moving his feet. He's not comfortable with us, standing next to him, rubbing on him. He's not comfortable with being restrained. This explains why in previous sessions he hasn't really wanted to pick up feet for us, because he doesn't feel comfortable having a foot taken away from him, because then he can't move his feet. He's much better about the turn on the forehand and moving his hip over for me than he was before. He's much better about it than he is to move the front end around. He's comfortable with me back on that part of his body, and he's accepting of me being back there and petting on him and touching him back there. I always finish with rubbing on him and petting on him, trying to keep my hands on him as much as I can. I work both sides of his body. I'm not really pulling his head that direction. He's kind of bringing his head around himself. I'd like to keep that loose so there is an option if he wants to go forward, he can go forward. But ideally, I'd like to keep that front end still and move that hip around. So now we're starting to slow his feet down a lot. Look at how much slower they're moving, how much less reactive this colt is being, and look at him cock that hind foot back there. He's got the hind foot cocked. That means that he's starting to show us that he's comfortable with what we're doing to him. So I'm just going to pet on him. We're getting a cameo guest appearance by JD and probably Scoden and Teddy in the Jeep there, and that's just another good thing to desensitize this colt to. And so now I'm going to start throwing the lead rope up over his back. Now, this is something I would do whether they were a weanling or they were a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old just starting in training. This is one of the number one things that they need to get used to, is accepting something being thrown up over their back. This is kind of the gradual next step I take after I've done the handling that I've done and done these basic maneuvers, asking them to move around. And look, he's not super happy about this rope behind him touching his legs. In the future, he's going to have to get used to this for the rest of his life to have a successful life. Have you ever had a horse get loose with a lead rope dangling behind them? It is a disaster if they're not used to this. Now, what I want you guys to see there is that we're starting to teach him about pressure around his girth area and his belly and feeling all of that. Now, on some horses, we haven't even brushed their belly yet, so they don't know what it feels like to have somebody touch their belly. I don't touch a belly on a horse until after I've done this, because they can so easily come up with a hind leg and kick you in the head, or in my case, I've been kicked in the arm and had my arm shattered from this. So I throw the lead rope over like that, and when they move around like he's done, it eventually gets to a point where I can grab that rope. And then once I feel confident that this colt isn't going to come up with a hind leg on me, then I'll reach under his body and I'll grab that rope, just like we would grab a girth or a cinch. But see how this rope, how he's moving around on his own? And now this rope is out here for me to grab it, pick it up, and then play with it as if it were something over his back, like we were going to cinch him up, let him feel all that. We're not asking him to move here. He's moving his feet because he's not super comfortable standing still, remember? And so I'm just going to play with it and desensitize him to this pressure, to this feel. And look, we're getting a leg cocked back there. This colt is very vocal about telling us what he is okay and not okay with. And that's the biggest thing the biggest point I want to point out to you guys when you're doing your groundwork is you have to pay attention to what the horse is telling you. You have to pay attention to your timing, because there are so many wrecks that could happen to you or happen to the horse because you didn't pay attention when the horse told you, hey, I'm not okay with this. That's how most of my wrecks have happened. I didn't pay attention to the horse when they were telling me, I'm not okay with what you're doing to me. This colt is much better about us throwing this rope over on the right side than he was on the left. And remember, since previous videos, he's always been better about us working on this right side. And he's moving around on his own for me to be able to pick up that rope and start desensitizing from this side. If he didn't move around like that, we would use our previous cue where we asked him to move his hip over to get that rope in a space where we can pick it up safely. So that's why these cues all build on each other. Now, this is a really cool deal that I started doing with him when I was out there. I started putting some pressure on that rope and asking him to take a step towards me. Now, we didn't have huge progress, but he was kind of leaning my direction, and he'd take a little half step that way with the pressure on that rope, and I thought that was really huge progress for this colt. I take the rope back a little bit further towards his flank too and put some pressure on it back there, and he wasn't overreactive. I mean, there are some horses that when they feel that rope under their belly, let alone back near their flank, that they will break into and go running across this round pen in a mad dash. So the fact that I've slowed his feet down at this point, it's taken me about 10 minutes to get to where I'm at. We have to remember that I turned this colt out before, and he had time to play before I worked with him. I'm not working him into the ground to get this response. I do a lot of petting on this colt. I especially rub him around his throat latch, his poll, his ears, his neck. I'm trying to develop a relationship with him and make sure he understands that it's okay. Now, I've moved on to a little nylon surcingle here. Simple little buckle. It's kind of a tiny little surcingle. It really only fits on little guys and 2-year-olds most of the time. A couple little simple buckles, some rings on it that jingle. He's responding exactly the way he has been this whole time, hasn't he? He just moves his little body out of the way. What I find with horses is that after they've responded a certain way to something, and they continue to respond that way throughout the rest of their life. So this colt is always going to respond to something new exactly how he's responding right here. So what I'm doing, because he is not real happy about me throwing this surcingle up over his back, I'm approaching him with it, touching him with it, and when he stands there for me, I back out of his space. If I take it away from him while he's still moving, then I've essentially just trained him to move away from that pressure, okay? And he just spooked at Jumper coming out of the trees over there. That's another thing that they have to be desensitized to. The cat goes over into the trees. We get a glimpse of Jumper, the mighty hunter over there stalking his prey, and they have to deal with that. So I just keep on approaching this colt with this surcingle. It's something new. You know, he was nervous about the rope at first, right? So now I'm setting it up there. I back away. He's not real comfortable. He wants to move his feet. I'm petting on him, trying to reassure him that it's okay. And when his feet stop, I take it off of him. Now it's about to get really ugly here for a second, and I'm just trying to stay with him. And that's the beauty of doing this on a young horse that's small. He's not going to drag me nearly as bad as something older and bigger. He's also going to give in a lot faster because he's younger and he doesn't have the endurance. This colt still needs me in his life. And look at the response that we're getting. When I back out of his space, we get a lowered neck and head. He still moves away when I approach him, and I approach aggressively. I don't sneak up on one. I come in confidently, assertively, because there's going to be a point where I come out of my tack room and he's going to be tied to the tie rail, and I'm going to be packing my saddle, the bridle, the pad, and I'm going to try to throw all this stuff on him at the same time, and he's got to be okay with me bringing all of these objects to him, fussing with the pad, hanging onto my saddle, trying to get everything up on his back. So coming at him with this little surcingle and him accepting this is crucial to the rest of his training and the safety of him as he gets older and gets bigger, and the safety of us as we continue to handle him and be around him. So there is nothing wrong with working with a horse at this age with desensitizing him to pieces of equipment. I go back to the approach and retreat technique again. Every time I go up to him, I try to put my hands on him. I set the surcingle on his back. He accepts it on his back, but he's not truly entirely accepting the situation. He still has his head raised. We can still see his ears kind of back, paying attention to what's on its back, but I'm going to quit there and recognize the try. Now I switch to the other side. Again, he's not real happy about it. We're starting over again on the brand new side. I do the retreat and approach again technique with him, and I try to make sure I retreat when he's standing still. Otherwise, I'm just going to be teaching this colt to move away from pressure. So now we've entered the flight or fight zone with him. He has gone backwards. We have lost the ground that we gained with this colt. It's about to get really ugly here. He is not accepting the surcingle on this side. He's not accepting me approaching him on this side anymore. He is done. He doesn't want to participate anymore. And even with the little bit of editing I've done already, I've only been working with this colt for about 20 minutes. So if that gives you a good idea of how long of a session you need to have with them. And also recognize how much to work with them at each individual session when you work on them. So now I have to fix what I just lost with this colt. He doesn't want me even coming near him at this point. It has nothing to do with the surcingle anymore. It has to do with me. So I have to get back to where I can get back up to him and touch him and pet him. And then we get a foot cock there, see? And he starts to lower his head a tiny bit, but he still puts it back up in that flight fight area, okay? And he still takes a few steps back when I approach, and I have to start all over again with approaching him and petting him and backing away and retreating to where he's comfortable and then coming back again. And this is a problem that I think a lot of people have with their horses, whether they're young horses or old horses, when the horse tells them, I'm not comfortable with that, and then they don't recognize that. I went back to the other side there for just a second, just to make sure I still had the other side before I came back to this right side, starting all over again with the approach and pet and back out of his space. And approach and pet again, and then every single time I go a little bit further. See how I started on his neck and then I gradually work further down his back every single time I go up to him. Again, I want him to stand still. I want him to keep his feet still. I want this horse comfortable with standing still and not having to move his feet. And I try putting the surcingle back up on his back. Less reaction, but look at how high that head goes up in the air. We have totally hit the sympathetic nervous system. He is in fight or flight mode. He is ready to get the heck out of there as quickly as possible. And this is where it all really goes bad. So what do you do? What do you do when it gets to this point? I mean, it's been a lot worse for me, and because I've done so many numbers, I know that I can fix this. But what do you do when you're first starting your colt for the first time, or you've only done a handful of these and you haven't had one that reacts like this? Well, you retreat. You slow down and you retreat and you take your time, because you have to finish on a good note. You can't put the colt away like this. So you have to back up. You have to go back to the place where they were comfortable. And he was comfortable when I was just approaching him without the surcingle. And then I go back to putting the surcingle back over his back again. I really had good intentions of putting the surcingle on and buckling it up on him. And we're not going to get that today, obviously, right? So I'm just trying to get to where I can set it back up on him, where I can approach him. All I'm asking him to do is stand there, let me pet on him, let me rub on him, and let me set this thing up on his back. And so far, he's back to handling it okay again. He still has his head up in the air. He still hasn't licked or chewed one single time. He still hasn't cocked a foot. He's still not real comfortable with me on this side. So this isn't a good place to end it here, okay? I mean, it may seem like we're getting results here. You know, he's not pulling away from me, but we're still not where we want to be to finish with this colt for the day. We do finally have a cocked hind foot. He's at least starting to look back at it. He's starting to think. He's lowering his neck and head. When they lower their neck and head like this, that's when the horse starts to think instead of just being that flight mode. And that's something that as horse handlers, we have to pay attention to that. And I know this is excruciatingly painful to just sit here and watch this and wait for this response. But this is what we have to do to be able to go to the next level with our horse. Otherwise, we're going to get in a world of trouble, and it won't be long before we're in the emergency room because of something that happened with this horse, okay? So we're getting the lowering neck and head. And here's the thing. I want to finish with me standing next to this colt because he doesn't 100% accept me next to him. My goal at this point was like, okay, we're okay with the surcingle, we're okay with the inanimate object, but he's still not okay with the person standing there. So I'm going to fast forward through some of this so you guys can get an idea of how much time it took to get there. But I'm going to rub on him a bunch. Again, he's not super comfortable with me up around his poll and around his ears. I just do as much hugging and rubbing on him and as much as I can connect to this horse physically as I possibly can, getting into his space and having him accept that I'm going to be there. So like I said, I'm going to fast forward through this so you guys can see how long I stand there with him. Total time I stood with him for about 5 minutes just waiting for him to accept everything that I've done with him. I'm going back and forth on both sides of him, petting him on both sides. This is something that we would do with a 2-year-old you're getting ready to ride. You know, them being able to see you on both sides of their body. Like even though I'm standing on his right side, I have my hand on the left side and he's having to be able to look at that out of his left eye. And now I'm just leaning there on him. And this is where I really sped it up. But I stood there for a total of like 5.5 minutes waiting for this colt to accept what I was doing to him. And I'm just standing there with him. He needed to accept my presence. And he wasn't happy about it. He had his head up in the air. The ears were slightly back. He was constantly paying attention. He was looking back and forth. He wouldn't cock a leg. He wouldn't lick and chew. He wouldn't give me a big sigh of relief. He just sat there irritated and frustrated, not accepting what I was doing. Now, when it does happen, I want to slow this way down and show you guys what happens when he does finally lower his head and lick and chew, so you can identify this colt when he does get it. We see him lick and chew. He relaxes his jaw and his poll. He takes a step backwards and he cocks this hind leg and he relaxes. So we have 3 things going on here. He lowered his neck and head, he yawned, he licked and chewed, and he cocked this leg, and he finally accepted me standing there with him. And I'm going to call it a day with that and quit on that note. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.